My message to you is this: if you keep sweeping this under the carpet, someone will die.
I think young people need to realise government shouldn't be scared. You should be scared of your government. They should be scared of you, because you're the one that holds power, not them. And they've forgotten that. It's your future. You can change it, because you do not want to go back to this. I can guarantee you that.
Action. Look at that! It's bloody sun. Well, we're back in Hawick today. We're at the Reivers. I've got no idea what it is, but I think we're going to find out. There's wee men with like sandbag t-shirts and jabby stick kings, and wee bairns running the range with swords. And I hear there's going to be fire later, so aye, we're going to find out what it's all about. There's wee horsey things, and honestly it's pure class, so we're going to have a wee tour around Hawick and find out what the Reivers is.
Hi, my name's Kath Elliott Walker. I'm chairman of the Hawick Reivers Association, run the annual Hawick Reivers Festival. We've been going now for 23 years, and it's all based on the theme of the Golden Reivers, which was a huge part of the history of this part of the country for hundreds of years. The Reivers were the local families, clans. Didn't tend to call them clans here actually, it was more families, where the intense loyalties were to family and kin rather than to necessarily the king, etc.
The Reivers basically were border feuds going on between English and Scottish families, basically. It was a time when Scotland and England had separate monarchs. Elizabeth I was on the throne in England through a lot of the time, and the wars only came to an end when she died and the Scottish King James VI was made James I of England, and it sort of unified-ish the two countries. Reiving was actually a series of cattle raids, extortion.
While at the Reivers, we got a chance to speak to some local residents and find out what their biggest concerns were, and one topic came up more than most. Issue these days in this area?
I think education.
Education. Or, more specifically, knife crime. So before we arrived at Hawick, we were made aware of a story which was breaking in the local paper, and the story kind of ties in with the themes of this episode being education. There was an incident at Burnfoot Community School, which is one of the community schools in Hawick. Now, a statement released by Scottish Borders Council reported that the incident was an inappropriate use of a cooking utensil. As time went on and as pressure mounted, Scottish Borders Council later backtracked on their statement and apologised. Why? Well, it turns out that yes, the story does follow the inappropriate use of a cooking utensil, but to put it in terms that me and you would maybe understand a bit better, a child was threatening people with knives. So you can see why there was quite a lot of anger around this. It seems from the obvious that maybe Scottish Borders Council tried to downplay the incident. Now, there could have been a number of reasons why they tried to do this, but it later appears that this has not been a one-off incident. This has been something which has been going on for a number of years, and all across the Scottish Borders we've seen a dramatic rise in violence in schools. So since the incident in the newspapers, 22 teachers, retired teachers and volunteers signed a joint statement to the Education Secretary warning of the violence in schools, because clearly enough's not being done. So the teachers thought, right, we'll take this into our own hands, and they released this joint statement. Now, the Education Secretary's reply to this statement was not, right, I hold my hands up, we've taken our eye off the ball, we're going to give you more support, or we're going to bring in some measure, or we're going to address this in some way. Instead, the Education Secretary just decided to attack some of the volunteers that signed this agreement. The Education Secretary says that he is upset and disheartened that this has been brought up in the media instead of being brought directly to him. Well, Mr. Education Secretary, maybe if you were actually doing your job, then this wouldn't be happening. Now, since this newspaper article was released, what has been branded as shockingly vindictive tactics by Scottish Borders Council, 2 volunteers have been removed, or effectively sacked, for speaking out. Just let that sink in. So, you're volunteering at a community school, and there's bairns running the range with knives, and you try and speak out, and yet you're sacked. Something's not right here. So it's very clear that this has been an ongoing pattern for a number of weeks, months, or even years. So whilst we were in Hawick, we took the opportunity to speak to some of the local residents and find out what's really going on.
And what SBC thought about it. And the knife incident brought that further into focus because basically they've tried to sweep it under the carpet and they've tried to make it go away as an incident. They've tried to avoid the police issuing the victim with a report about it. They've used language in letters to suggest that it wasn't a knife incident, that it was a cooking utensil incident.
When we get the reports at SBC, they don't reflect what we're being told by the teachers and the kids. And that seems to be right across the board at the minute.
Just blatant doctoring of the figures and blatant sort of lying about what's going on.
Stress.
I always feel, and I always have felt, that if there's a problem, you've got to acknowledge there's a problem to solve it. And to just kind of go, there's nothing to see here, it doesn't help anybody.
Transparency.
Yeah.
Ignorance is bliss mentality, is
Yes.
it's sweep it under the carpet, out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah.
If we pretend it's not happening, then it's not happening. And the irony is that it's really, no pun intended, kind of stabbed them in the back.
Pupils, I mean, they talk about GERFIC, getting it right for every child. And, as far as, we can see, it's like you're not getting it right for any child. Formerly was a teacher at Hawick High School. And then I set up a small education business and I worked out at Selkirk High School. And currently, on a Friday morning, I run a wee class up at Burnfoot Hub. Yeah.
What are the biggest issues that you're facing, and what could James do to support, or any candidate do to better support?
Well, there's so many issues, and I mean, it's a current climate that we're living under, I suppose. Education, obviously, as a former teacher, very passionate about education, and I'm not happy about the policy that's put forward by Scottish Government. I feel we need to look at that very carefully because there's a lot of issues that are happening within schools that are not being dealt with. As I say, I worked with James. We work really well together as the two Scottish Border independent councillors. And I think we have the same kind of passion for our communities. It's our communities are important. It's not about scoring political points. There's times in the council we'll go with administration. There's times that we'll go with the opposition. Our priority is our communities.
So we're still here in Hawick. We've just had a really, really interesting sit-down conversation with some members of the community and ex-teachers. Some of their main concerns, I'm actually lost for words. What we're seeing in Hawick, especially within young people, is a rise in violence against adults. The point was brought up about a 10 or 13-year-old girl who took a knife into school. And for me, I feel like all these issues are avoidable. I feel like Scottish Borders Council are running this vanity project where the kids aren't being listened to, the teachers are being effectively muzzled and told not to talk. The head teachers are saying about how wonderful their schools are, and I feel like we're doing a lot of dancing around the main issues when we're getting teachers that are being threatened with knives and threatened with violence and then being told that they can't speak. I think that is a really, really, really big issue.
Okay, so, James Anderson, thank you for joining me. So we've spent a day in Hawick. Not today, this is not being filmed in order. So I'm not sure if you've seen the article, Knife Crime. So for the people who haven't seen it, I'll give a wee kind of like brief of what it was. So, there was an incident in Burnfoot Community School where a student threatened a volunteer with, and I quote, a cooking utensil, or I think the exact quote from Scottish Boards Council when asked about this was the inappropriate use of a cooking utensil. Yep. Now, after a wee bit of pressure, Scottish Boards Council later backtracked this statement and apologised for downplaying the incident and admitted that the weapon used was actually a small cooking knife. Since then, 22 teachers, both retired, still working, and volunteers signed a joint statement to the Education Secretary. Since then, 2 volunteers have been removed or effectively sacked for speaking out in a move that has been branded as shockingly vindictive tactics by Scottish Borders Council. So, the Education Secretary is saying, why did they not go to Temple? I think this has been an issue for quite a while. And I think it's clear by this article that Scottish Borders Council have tried to sweep this under a rug. It's not a big deal. So I guess the first kind of question is, why are staff being punished for speaking out?
I won't comment on the individual cases because it's quite difficult being a counsellor and being restricted to what I can say about the staff at SBC. So that's a tricky one, but as a candidate and having spoken to a lot of the people with yourself as a candidate and not as a counsellor, it does appear that those who spoke out and signed the letter to the newspaper, yes, they have been removed, and the comments made to them were no longer allowed in the school. I think that stands out as you're not far wrong by saying they have been removed. That's their opinion of it as well. So it's not just your take on it, it's definitely the people who are involved and who stuck up for the teachers, that's their opinion of what's happening as well.
If a student brings a knife into school, what is, for a teacher, what is the procedure? What's the kind of guidelines set out by the Scottish Government or Scottish Borders Council?
Scottish Borders Council just follows the guidelines set out by the Scottish Government. The Scottish Government guidelines are basically a word salad that can be interpreted in a multiple ways. It all depends on the person reading it, and if the person at the top reads it a certain way, that goes down the line. And I think that's what's happening in our schools in the Borders. I know in other areas across Scotland it's been interpreted slightly differently and things are a lot worse. But in the Scottish Borders, the way that it's handled, if somebody brings a weapon in, it's remove everybody else and try to isolate that student. Which is fair enough if they're brandishing a knife, that's the way to go, get everybody else out of harm's way. I think the problem comes when, what do you do with that student? At that point, you've got them isolated, they're to be talked down. Yep, what happens to them after they're talked down? Because the next day they're back in the school. They're not removed for a period of time till there's an investigation done what led to that situation. Literally the next day they're back in school with the same students and the same teachers who have seen them brandishing a knife the day before. So it's that interpretation of the policies that guide the education department that's wrong.
I think there was an incident, I'm not entirely sure where about in Scotland, if it was in the Borders or further in Scotland, but there was an incident where a student brought a knife into school. The alleged intent of harming another people or a teacher. Now, one of the teachers actually managed to get the knife off the student. However, that teacher is now facing an assault charge. Where do you draw the line between self-defense and assault?
Well, that's a problem with the law, really. In the UK,
if you are faced with somebody, say somebody breaks into your house and they're going to come at you with a baseball bat or something, the onus is on you to remove yourself from the situation, or it could be seen as you're antagonising. So I think that's where that same silly law that says you should get yourself out of harm's way, that's what the problem is here, and it's mixing with the education side of things. I don't think anybody should be charged for restraining anybody, not just a student. But if you're having to restrain a student, you shouldn't be charged for it if they're carrying a knife, or if it's for their own safety.
This might be a bit of an extreme example, but if you look over at what's happened in America, I mean, we see it all the time, school shootings. America has got a huge issue with school shootings and school violence. Obviously, not as extreme over here, but we are seeing a rise in violent behaviour, and some schools in the Scottish border, such as White, are now implementing lockdowns to safeguard children. Are we heading towards an American-style school where, children may be put in danger?
Well, I hope not. I don't want to see that kind of thing being commonplace. I think they've maybe got in one.
This isn't a one-off incident. This is getting worse and worse and worse.
Yeah, and I think that happens when the initial incident isn't dealt with appropriately or firmly enough, and other students think, well, they got away with it, they were in school the next day, they don't see any consequences for the actions of taking a knife into school. So that carries on. It's the same with any kind of behaviour, and it spirals out of control. And that's what's happening across Scotland, where it really is just a too softly approach, and things just spiral out of control.
Why do you think there is a rise in violence towards teachers? Do you think it is just a lack of respect? Do you think it's social media, or do you think it's COVID? The aftermath of COVID. Where do you think the root cause?
I think COVID gets the blame for a ton of things, really. But yeah, COVID gets the blame for a lot, but I don't think it is. I think so much has changed since that point in time. People's attitudes towards things have changed, and kids are not as disciplined as they used to be. There's a lot of emphasis on the free will of the child and the voice of the child, which is right. They should be heard, and all the freedom of expression and so on, that's a good thing. Be yourself and all that stuff, that's great, but I think it's gone too far. And when it comes to the bad behaviour, what they're now saying is if you're acting out, that's a symptom of something else, and they don't deal with it as bad behaviour anymore, they just treat it as a symptom. And the simple fact is, when one child in a classroom of 32 is acting out and showing violent behaviour, at what point do you say, right, enough's enough, we need to stop this, we need to remove that child, find out what's actually going on to cause this, and show the rest of the class that that's not acceptable? Because I don't think it's acceptable for having one or two children disrupting an entire class and then just going straight back into that class as if nothing's happened.
Do you think the rise in violence could maybe be a cry for help? We went to Kelso High School. We weren't able to film there, but we did speak to some of the students. One of the students we spoke to said that they had no, I can't remember if it was they had no, was it ICT, maths and English, or was it English and business? It was one of them. It was 3 subjects, and
one of them was maths or English.
Maths or English, and they didn't have a teacher, so they were learning off iPads.
Learn off YouTube.
Learn off YouTube. So is it any wonder that kids are acting out when they're going into school, they're sitting in front of an iPad learning off YouTube, there's no support, and there is a threat of getting stabbed on top of that? Because it seems that only the kids who act out get any form of support.
Do you know what? It does look like that on the surface of it. I absolutely agree. The kids who are sitting trying to get on with their studies, they're the ones that are being negatively affected, and I really think that they've got a right to a settled education where there aren't one or two kids acting up and causing chaos and threatening people. It's just not acceptable, and they need to bring it back a bit and stop focusing on what the cause of that is at that specific point in time. They need to concentrate on the behaviour that's been exhibited and remove that child, and then figure out what's going on with that child, instead of let's remove 28 children from a class while that one child destroys the class. Because I know in primary schools some of the children that would be classed as neurodivergent, they're emptying the classrooms and the kids are literally wrecking the classroom because the teachers can't just say, right, calm down, let's take you to a quiet corner and place them somewhere where they can't hurt themselves as well. Because when a kid's wrecking a classroom, they can hurt themselves.
I guess that leads me to my next question, is where does the buck kind of stop? Who's kind of responsible for this? Because we've kind of got this wee hierarchy thing. We've got Scottish Borders Council, who it seems to be running this vanity project of everything's hunky-dory, nothing's happening here. Then we've got the head teachers who feel isolated. They feel like they're getting no support from the council. Then you've got the parents who are blaming the teachers. And then you've got the teachers who are effectively being muzzled, because any teacher who speaks out gets effectively punished, as we've seen.
Yeah.
2 volunteers got suspended. All this, we've got the kids.
Yep.
And it kind of feels like there's a complete and utter lack of communication. You know, the council aren't communicating with the head teachers aren't communicating with the teachers and the parents, and like...
Probably spot on, to be quite honest, that the communication is never great, and the amount of things that I've dealt with over the years where it's come down to bad communication. Teachers want to have that communication and they don't get it. The teachers do feel isolated, and that's one of the things that's been brought up by the union rep and by the teachers that I speak to and by the volunteers in the schools, by retired teachers. We sat down with a table.
Teachers are more like social workers these days than actual teachers.
They're starting to feel like it, and that's really sad, because wasn't so long ago where pastoral teachers were in the schools and they dealt with that, and the teachers dealt with the teaching. A maths teacher dealt with the maths stuff, and if there was something that was a bit more challenging to do with behaviour, you'd have the pastoral teachers. But now teachers are being asked to deal with more and more and more.
What's your advice for teachers who are currently fearing for their safety and are unable to speak out?
If the management system's not listening to them, then they should go to their union, and then they can speak on their behalf, and that's the only safe path for them to get their voice out, because they're contracted and they technically can't speak against the local authority.
You're a foster father.
Yes.
If your kids were going into school, they had no teachers, they were learning off YouTube, and they were fearing for their safety, what would your message to them be?
They wouldn't be going into the school. I mean, there has been a case in one of the schools, 2 of the schools over the last sort of 5 years, where there's been incidents, and I've just went into the school and said, if you can't say that this has been resolved, if you can't tell me that this is now a safe space, then my kids aren't going to be there.
So this is a story which is actually quite personal to me, because I'm not ashamed to admit that I am one of these statistics. When I was 14 years old, I made the mistake of taking a knife into school, and I was later excluded. Now, I didn't take a knife into school to cause trouble or even for defence. I was just really struggling. It's something that plays on my mind quite a lot, and I look back now and reflect that maybe the education system and Eyemouth High School didn't do enough to support me. I was bullied a lot throughout school, and even now, but the school knew that, and the only coping mechanism I found that helped me escape was through self-harming. And this gradually got out of control, which resorted to me slitting my wrists in the school bathrooms. The school knew that I was self-harming, but they didn't really care. But once they found out how and where, I remember very clearly coming home from school that day, and later that night getting a phone call and telling me that was it. I was put in a knife crime category and left to fend for myself. Now, a lot of you know that it was getting excluded from school which led me to start writing a lot more, and through writing I've been able to share my story and raise awareness through my film The Reflection Lies, which is based off knife crime and these very events of my life and what was really going through my head at that time, in a hope to raise awareness. The question I get a lot is, do I regret it? And the answer is no. Would I do it again? Of course not. Would I take a knife out in public again? Of course I wouldn't. Would I go back and change what I did? No, I wouldn't. In fact, I stand by that getting kicked out of school was the best thing to ever happen to me. I feel like it allowed me to have a unique perspective of the world. You know, you go through school and it's hard. It's like a factory. You go in at the age of 6, you get taught not to be curious, not to be creative, to reject your natural instinct, and told you can only move when permission is granted. You get squeezed and suppressed into this little box that they control, and it's hard. Anyone who's different or stands out almost gets punished. And yet you go through school and you look back with those rose-tinted glasses with your wee diploma or degree and you think, nah, wasn't that hard. But when you're there at that time, it is hard and you forget that. But I feel I was able to break free from this cycle. I watched as my classmates went down this conveyor belt like lambs to slaughter and got their identity stripped and turned into good little factory workers. But my point is, the world has changed. This Victorian system designed to suppress and control, it's broken. We were told from an early age that if we work hard, play by the rules, we will be successful in life. You told us that our whole lives, and now we leave school and find out that, hang on, I'll never own my own house, or I can't afford petrol, or I can't afford to have kids. So no wonder these kids are acting out, because they know this so-called education system and capitalistic construct of society will rape them for what they have and eat the leftovers. I left school 3 years ago, and the thing that hurts the most is nothing's changed. But this is my message to the Scottish education system and all the Holyrood candidates who claim to champion for change. Instead of sweeping this under the carpet, how about you do your job and educate these kids and show them that there is another alternative? Actually be brave enough to encourage an open conversation about mental health and knife crime misuse instead of burying your heads under the sand and pretending it's not happening. All it takes is one kid to take a knife into school, and then the kid on the next desk over feels intimidated, so they take a knife into school, and then the kid on the next desk over, they take a knife into school, and then it's just this domino effect, and then it'll be way out of your control. Maybe instead of waiting for these incidents to happen, why don't you actually get to the root of these issues? Because if you don't, I promise to you, Julie Peroni, Leslie Munro, Rachel Hamilton, John Lamont, John Swinney, Keir Starmer, or whoever's going to be in power next, my message to you is this: if you keep sweeping this under the carpet, someone will die. At which point, whose fault is it? The person who pulled the trigger, or the people who enabled the gunman to bear arms?
So I'm here at Copath today, a lovely sunny day. The weather's really turned. During 2025, a lot of people will know that the Scottish Borders Council tried to close some of the smaller nurseries, and Copath was one of them at threat of closure. If we don't get stability in our nurseries, we're not going to get the people moving to the small areas. Copath is a really vibrant area, and we want to keep it that way, and that's why the Scottish Government needs to put more support into nurseries and into primary schools in rural areas. One of the very confusing things that happened during the protest for this school and this nursery, we had a Conservative council, Conservative-led who were trying to close it. And we also had Conservatives marching in the protest to save it. Now, when you're talking about political parties, you really have to ask the question, if they are in one voice closing something and in the other supporting keeping it, what do they actually stand for anymore? Because all they do is flip-flop back and forward. But with myself, what you get is exactly what you get. If I say I support rural nurseries, I am not going to flip-flop and suddenly decide to close them. So keep that in mind when you vote this.
Familiar.
May the
Well,
7th.
here in Eyemouth, we've been fighting for a standalone primary school for the past 20 years. But whatever happened to that? Well, let's go and find out.
So, a quick walk through of the area. What we're looking for is the nursery and early years centre down there, which was originally planned for, and that's really important that we move with that so we don't lose the funding, because if we lose any part of the funding at any stage, it's going to really scupper everything because the budget is so tight. What I hope will go through council is going to be the standalone primary, which will be somewhere here.
So where the old high school was?
Basically
hopefully.
Where the old high school was.
So basically just what people have been asking for the past like 20 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's how we roll now.
So early years centre here, hopefully.
Yep.
Primary school behind you where the old high school was.
Or it could be where I'm standing.
Or it could be where you're standing.
Where I'm standing.
And then behind us we've got the pump track.
Pump track that way, so that's going to be one of the biggest ones in Scotland with fancy bits on it.
What's your hopes for the Destination Play Park?
Destination Play Park, what I really want to see is once the primary's planned out, I want the Destination Play Park to be at the back of the schools. I really want to see on a Friday afternoon the primary school being able to open the gates to the playground onto the Destination Play Park, and it could be the most fantastic Friday afternoon every week. They want children to learn through play. Well, let's give them a pump track, let's give them a skate park, a football pitch, a rugby pitch. All that should be there. Everywhere else in the borders has all these things. Why have we not had it all this time? So we're making sure we're going to get it.
Here now, Hen, listen, that's been some fucking episode, but hang on, wait. I've got something to show you. Hang on. Oh! Right. Now, I've got post. Here, right. Which one's this? Oh yeah. Right, so I got a nice wee leaflet from Scottish Labour. Cheers very much. What's the guy called? What do we call our wee man? Oh, he's signed it and everything. Oh, what a nice wee man. What's he called? Is it like Shitty Galwick or something? I can't mind what he's called. Oh, love it. I'll be interviewing the Scottish Labour candidate later this month, Kay Marie Hughes. Oh, now listen, she's lovely. Nice lady. I've then got Scottish Family Party. What are they preaching? Basically, they want to ban condoms and implement a marriage box. I actually want to get married and see what a marriage box is now, because that sounds kinky. And then, oh here, Farm Foods, Lush. Ooh, I applied for a job at Farm Foods and never heard back. Oh, 2 for 16 quid chicken. Cost of living, my arse. Right. Oh, here's my woman, my wee Thatcher, Maggie Thatcher. Rachel Hamilton. Oh, we like her. And are you ready? Are you ready though? Are you actually ready? Right. It's my fucking man. Right. It's my wee man, John Redpath, my lover. Not only has he sent me 1 leaflet, he sent me fucking 3. He just loves putting things through my wee fucking letterbox. Oh, John Redpath, will you agree to do an interview with me? I want to get this signed. Oh, love him. He's just lush. He's just adorable, isn't he? He's absolutely gorgeous. Just look at that wee hamster face. Look at it. Oh, love it. And at that, I'll leave it there.